Sometimes the kindest people are the ones who have been the most alone. At 55 years old, Eliza Hart had poured 3 decades of her life into teaching other people's children, while her own dreams sat on a shelf, gathering dust like old forgotten books. She was the heart of Walnut Creek, the town's only teacher, its moral compass, and its most generous soul. One cold March evening, that generosity led her to offer a bowl of hot stew to a stranger huddled against the biting wind outside her schoolhouse. He was a man with tired eyes and a quiet strength, who called himself Cole. As she spoke of her small town's worries, of the powerful cattle barons squeezing the life out of them, she saw only kindness in his gaze. She never imagined that this quiet stranger, Cole Walker, owned more land, more cattle, and more politicians than anyone in 3 counties. He was the very man everyone feared. Over a simple meal and honest conversation, he found something he thought he'd lost forever. A person who saw the man, not the fortune. But when the sun came up, secrets would crawl out of the shadows. Secrets that would change not just their lives, but the fate of the entire town. What happens when a woman who has given everything discovers she's been sheltering the very wolf at her door? The morning sun sliced through the dusty windows of the Walnut Creek schoolhouse, painting long, lonely stripes across the worn floorboards. Eliza Hart stood at the front of the empty room, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool surface of her teaching slate. For 30 years, this simple piece of black stone had been her most constant companion. On it were the chalky ghosts of yesterday's arithmetic lesson, numbers that told the story of life on the frontier, bushels of wheat, head of cattle, and the ever-shrinking dollars needed to survive another brutal Wyoming winter. At 55, Eliza had a quiet beauty, the kind that's earned, not given. Her auburn hair, now threaded with silver, was tied back in the same practical bun she'd worn since she first arrived in 1855. Her gray eyes held a patient wisdom, the kind that comes from watching generations of children stumble over their first letters and then, like magic, find their wings in the pages of a book. The schoolhouse itself was a reflection of her spirit, humble, sturdy, and built to last. Made from rough-hewn timber and chinked with prairie clay, it was a testament to the town's belief that education was a light worth keeping lit, especially in the dark corners of the frontier. 24 small desks, carved with the initials of children long grown, filled the room. In the corner, a pot-bellied stove stood like a grumpy old soldier, its chimney pipe a crooked salute to the sky. Eliza's desk was at the front, its drawers a museum of her life's work. Stubby pencils, ink made from berries and soot, and the leather-bound grade book that held not just scores, but the hopes and fears of every child she'd ever taught. Tucked behind her desk was a small cot, a recent addition that spoke a quiet, desperate truth about her finances. She had come to Walnut Creek as a bright-eyed young woman of 25, fresh from a Boston teacher's college, her head full of books and her heart full of dreams about civilizing the West. The town was impossibly small then, a handful of buildings huddled around a creek that ran cold and clear from the mountains. But Eliza saw potential in the faces of the children, who walked for miles just to learn, in the parents who sacrificed precious daylight to attend her evening literacy classes. She saw a community that was hungry for knowledge. 3 decades later, those children were the pillars of Walnut Creek. Samuel Morrison, who once cried in frustration over his letters, now ran the town's bustling general store. Mary Catherine O'Brien, once a girl so shy she spoke in whispers, was now the region's most trusted midwife. And Thomas Brennan, the boy with a genius for numbers, had gone east to study engineering and returned to design the irrigation system that had made their valley bloom. For all her success in the classroom, Eliza's personal life was as empty as the schoolhouse after the last bell. She'd had proposals over the years, from a kind rancher, the town doctor, another teacher, but she had gently turned them all down. Her calling, she believed, was to her students, not to a husband. The children of Walnut Creek were her family, the schoolhouse her home. But as she learned, a sense of purpose wasn't the same as happiness. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the setting sun bled across the empty desks, a profound loneliness would settle around her. She filled the silence with work, grading papers, mending books, preparing for the next day. But sometimes when the wind howled across the prairie, a hollow ache would open up inside her, a longing for someone to share the day's end with, someone who cared about her dreams as much as she cared for everyone else's. The town had grown up around her, from a dozen buildings to nearly 40, a home for 200 souls. Main Street was now a proper thoroughfare, with Morrison's store, Dr. Henley's practice, the Silver Dollar Saloon, and the grandly named Cattleman's Hotel. Yet as the town prospered, Eliza's own situation had grown fragile. For 25 years, she had boarded with the Hendersons, a kindly couple who treated her like a daughter. But when they fell ill and moved to Denver, she was left without a home. The school board, with tight fists and tighter budgets, grudgingly allowed her to sleep on the cot in the schoolhouse. It was a temporary fix, a violation of county rules, and a constant humming source of shame. But the bigger worry was the debt. The school was drowning. Territorial funding had been slashed again and again. The town's contributions had dried up as crop prices fell and drought settled in. The school owed money for lumber, for coal, for the precious books that were the foundation of everything she taught. Every month a new bill arrived, a new demand she couldn't meet. And circling like vultures were the cattle syndicates. For over a year, their agents had been sweeping through the county, making aggressive offers on the ranch land that surrounded Walnut Creek. These weren't local ranchers looking to expand. They were faceless investors from the East who saw the frontier not as a home, but as a line on a ledger. They spoke of efficiency and consolidation, of massive operations shipping beef to Chicago and New York. They didn't speak of the families they would displace, the community they would shatter, the way of life they would erase forever. Eliza had seen their shadow creeping over the town. The bank grew stricter with its credit. The territorial representatives stopped answering their letters. Even some of her own students spoke of leaving, their parents convinced the future was in the cities, not on the dying frontier. It was into this world of quiet desperation that Cole had appeared. He'd arrived 3 days earlier on a horse that looked tired but well-bred, his clothes simple but well-made. His hands were calloused like a working man's, but there was a stillness in his posture, an authority in his gaze, that suggested he was used to being obeyed. Her offer of food had been pure instinct, the simple charity of the frontier. But as they shared meals over the next few evenings, a strange and welcome warmth began to fill the lonely corners of her life. He wasn't just a drifter, he listened. He listened with a genuine interest that startled her. He asked thoughtful questions about her teaching, about the town's troubles, and spoke with a quiet intelligence about everything from literature to livestock. His presence was a comfort, a steady anchor in the storm that was threatening to tear her world apart. He seemed to understand the weight she carried, the loneliness that came from a life of service. She heard echoes of her own solitude in the stories he told of his travels, though he was careful to never reveal too much about his past. Last night, over bread and preserved peaches, he'd asked about her dreams for the school. The question had caught her off guard. It had been years since anyone had asked what she wanted instead of what she needed. She found herself talking for hours, describing the library she hoped to build, the science equipment she longed for, the advanced classes she dreamed of offering. Knowledge is power, she had said, the words that had been her guiding star for 30 years. But more than that, it's freedom. Cole had nodded, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. And what about your own freedom, Miss Hart? What would you do if you could shape your own destiny? The question had silenced her. It had been so long since she'd considered her own wants that she hardly knew how to answer. I suppose, she finally said, I would want to know that my life had made a difference, that the world was a little better because I had been in it. He had smiled then, a smile that transformed his serious face. I think you can rest easy on that account, Miss Hart. The world is definitely better for having you in it. Now, as she prepared for another day, she found herself wondering about the man who had brought such unexpected light into her life. He didn't fit. His speech was too educated, his manners too refined for a simple cowhand. Yet he seemed to genuinely care about the fate of her small town. As she picked up a piece of chalk, she hoped he would still be there when school let out, that another evening of quiet conversation awaited her. She had no way of knowing that the man she was sharing her meager meals with held the power to solve all her problems with a single signature. She had no idea that his presence in Walnut Creek would soon force her to question everything she believed about good and evil, wealth and power, and the true meaning of love. The envelope arrived with the morning mail, delivered by young Timothy Patterson. Eliza recognized the official seal of the Territorial Education Office at once. They never sent letters unless the news was bad. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax, trying to keep her composure as her students filed into the room, their bright, noisy energy a stark contrast to the cold dread coiling in her stomach. The words on the page swam before her eyes, then snapped into brutal, horrifying focus. Due to outstanding debts totaling $340, failure to meet territorial standards regarding adequate housing for the instructor, the Walnut Creek School is hereby ordered to cease operations, effective immediately. All educational materials were to be surrendered. The building itself would be sold at public auction to satisfy the debts. The foreclosure notice fluttered from her numb fingers, landing on the floor like a dead leaf. 30 years. 30 years of sacrifice, of nurturing, of building futures, all of it erased by a single piece of paper. She stood frozen, the morning sunlight feeling like an accusation. Miss Hart, little Sarah Caldwell, who had just last week beamed with pride after reading her first full sentence aloud, was looking up at her with worried eyes. "Are you feeling poorly?" Eliza forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. "I'm fine, dear. Please take your seat." But she wasn't fine. She was shattering. As the children settled at their desks, their innocent chatter filling the room, the floor beneath her felt like it was crumbling away. This school wasn't just her job, it was her life. These children weren't just her students, they were her legacy. How could she tell them it was over? How could she explain that men in far-off offices, men who had never met them, had decided their futures weren't worth a measly $347? The morning passed in a fog. She taught spelling, she corrected arithmetic, but her mind was screaming, clawing for a solution that didn't exist. By noon, when she dismissed the children for their lunch break, a bone-deep exhaustion had settled over her. She was sitting at her desk, staring at the foreclosure notice and fighting a losing battle against tears, when she heard his footsteps on the wooden walkway. Cole appeared in the doorway, hat in his hands, his face etched with concern. "Miss Hart," he said softly, "Timothy Patterson said you received some bad news. I hope you don't mind my checking on you." The kindness in his voice was almost too much to bear. She looked up at this stranger who had become her only confidant, and her carefully constructed composure finally crumbled. "The school is being closed," she said, her voice a raw whisper. She held up the notice. "It's all over." Cole stepped inside, his expression hardening as he took the letter from her. He read it quickly, his eyes scanning the dense legal language with a familiarity that struck her as odd. He wasn't just reading it, he was analyzing it. "This is unconscionable," he said, his voice low and tight with anger. "A debt of $347? That's less than the price of a good horse." "It might as well be $1 million, Eliza replied bitterly. "I don't have it. The town doesn't have it." She walked to the window, watching her students playing in the street, their laughter a painful reminder of everything she was about to lose. Their chance at a better life is disappearing because of money. She felt him come to stand behind her. "Who makes these decisions?" he asked, the anger in his voice now a low rumble. "Who has the authority to destroy a child's future over such a pittance?" "The Territorial Education Board, the county commissioners." She turned to face him, surprised by the intensity in his gaze. "They're all in the pockets of the cattle syndicates. They want these children working on ranches, not learning to think for themselves. An educated populace asks too many questions." Cole was quiet, his eyes fixed on the notice again. When he looked up, there was a cold fire in them she hadn't seen before. "This signature," he said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "Jeremiah Hutchkins, Territorial Commissioner. Yes, he's the one leading the charge, closing schools all over the territory. He calls it fiscal responsibility. We call it theft, stealing our children's future for the benefit of his wealthy friends." "And this debt," Cole pressed, "how did it accumulate?" Eliza explained the slow, painful bleed of resources. The extra coal for the brutal winter, the emergency roof repairs after a hailstorm, the textbooks ordered just before the funding was cut. Each expense was small, necessary, and unavoidable. Together, they had become a death sentence. "I've tried everything," she said, her voice thick with despair. "I've written to philanthropists, to church groups. I tried to get a personal loan, but no bank will lend to a woman without collateral. I've been sleeping here on that cot just to save money, and now they're using that against me too." Cole folded the notice with sharp, deliberate movements. "What would it take to save it?" he asked. "Not just pay the debt, but secure its future?" The question seemed absurd. What could this wandering cowhand possibly do? But his tone was serious, demanding a serious answer. "Money, of course, but more than that. We'd need to counter the influence of the syndicates. We'd need someone with real power, real political connections, someone the commissioners couldn't just ignore or intimidate." She gave a sad, hollow laugh. "Someone like a major cattle baron." For a split second, a strange expression flickered across Cole's face, something she couldn't quite read. Then it was gone. "I'm afraid my acquaintance with cattle barons is limited," he said, his voice even. "But don't give up hope, Miss Hart. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places." As evening approached, Cole stayed, helping her tidy the classroom. His quiet presence was a comfort, yet a new unease had taken root in her mind. His reaction to the foreclosure notice, his familiarity with legal terms, his pointed questions about power and politics, it didn't add up. There was a piece of the puzzle missing. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice casual as she stacked books, "may I ask what you did before you took to traveling? You seem to know a great deal about business matters." He paused, his back to her. "I've had various occupations over the years," he said carefully. "A man learns many things when he moves around." It was an answer that was not an answer. Eliza didn't press, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the man in her schoolhouse was far more than he appeared. That night, as they shared another simple meal of bread and cheese, she clung to his steady presence as her world fell apart around her. She had no way of knowing that the man sitting across from her, the man whose kindness was her only comfort, not only knew the cattle barons she feared, he was the king of them all. Cole stood at the window of his room in the cattleman's hotel, the worn leather of his saddlebags a stark contrast to the secrets they held. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were documents that could buy and sell the entire town of Walnut Creek 10 times over. Bank drafts from Denver and Chicago, correspondence with cattle buyers in Kansas City, and the legal deeds establishing his ownership of ranches that spanned 3 territories, all marked with the simple Walker brand, a W inside a circle. He'd come to Walnut Creek to scout it as a potential shipping point for his vast cattle operations. It was a routine trip, one of dozens he'd made. Travel incognito, assess the town, then reveal his identity and make his offers. It was efficient. It was profitable. It had always been simple. Until now. Until Eliza Hart, the quiet school teacher with the kind eyes and fierce dedication, had upended everything. Every conversation with her revealed a depth of character that both humbled and captivated him. Her fight for the school had awakened a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years, a righteous anger that had been dulled by years of boardroom negotiations and political maneuvering. The irony was a bitter pill. He was the very force she was fighting against, the embodiment of the large-scale, profit-driven operations that were crushing small communities like hers. Yet she was everything he hadn't known he was searching for. Someone who saw past the wealth and the power to the man beneath. Someone whose own worth was measured not in dollars, but in the lives she had shaped. Downstairs in the hotel's small dining room, the morning conversation was grim. "Shame about the school," Dr. Henley said to Samuel Morrison. "Miss Hart's beside herself." "Could use the building for storage," Morrison replied, ever the pragmatist, "though I suppose the children will go without schooling for a while." "Might not be a while," said Tom Brennan, joining them. "Word is they're consolidating all the smaller schools. Children will have to board in the county seat if they want an education." Cole listened, every instinct screaming at him to stand up, to announce who he was, to end this madness with a single sentence. A word from Cole Walker would solve everything. His influence was legendary. No bureaucrat in the territory would dare cross him. But to reveal himself now would shatter the fragile trust he'd built with Eliza. It would reframe every kind word, every shared meal, as a calculated deception. And he wasn't ready to see that look of betrayal in her eyes. Instead, he finished his breakfast and walked toward the schoolhouse. He found her standing by the door, staring at a new notice that had been nailed to the wood overnight. Even from a distance, he could see the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she held herself as if bracing for a physical blow. "More news?" he asked gently. She turned to him, her eyes red-rimmed, but her voice steady. "They're conducting an official inspection tomorrow. If the school fails, and it will, given that I'm living here illegally, they'll proceed with immediate closure. No appeal." Cole read the notice. It was signed by Jeremiah Hutchkins himself, along with two other commissioners Cole knew personally. They were both on the payroll of a rival cattle syndicate, a group of Eastern investors who were even more ruthless than he was. This wasn't just a closure. It was a coordinated attack, a strategic move to clear the way for a massive land grab. "What standards are they looking for?" he asked, though he already knew. "Impossible ones," Eliza said, her voice laced with bitter humor. "Proper teacher certification, which requires a trip to the Capitol, a separate residence for the instructor. New textbooks, repairs to the building. It's a list designed to make us fail." She unlocked the door and they went inside. The room was humble, but it was clean, organized, and filled with the quiet evidence of learning and love. To him, it was more impressive than any corporate headquarters he'd ever set foot in. "Miss Hart," he said carefully, "hypothetically, if money were not an issue, what would it take to meet these standards?" Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly extinguished by reality. "Mr. Cole, we've been over this. The money doesn't exist. Just humor me," he pressed. She sighed, then began to list the items. A small house for her to live in, roof repairs, new books, the cost of the trip to the Capitol for her certification. The total, by his calculations, was less than he'd spent on a single business dinner in Denver. Yet for her, it was an insurmountable mountain. "And politically?" he asked. "What would it take to ensure a fair inspection?" Her expression grew grim. "That's the real problem. They're not coming to evaluate. They're coming to condemn. It would take someone with immense political power. Someone the commissioners couldn't afford to cross." She managed a sad smile. "Someone like a major cattle owner. But they're all either part of the syndicate or too afraid to fight them." Cole turned away, pretending to examine a child's drawing on the wall. The conversation was becoming a minefield. Every word she spoke was a perfect description of him. He was the solution to her every problem, and his silence was a form of betrayal that grew heavier with each passing moment. "Mr. Cole," her voice was soft with concern, "you seem troubled. I hope I haven't burdened you with my problems." He turned back, struck again by her grace. Even in her own crisis, she worried about him. "Not at all, Miss Hart. I was just thinking about the injustice of it all." The compliment brought a faint blush to her cheeks, and his resolve wavered. How much longer could he keep up this charade? But how could he tell the truth without destroying the one genuine connection he'd found in a lifetime of lonely power? Tomorrow the inspectors would arrive. Tomorrow they would likely shatter her world. And he was running out of time. The weight of his secret was crushing him, made heavier by the gut-wrenching knowledge that the woman he was beginning to care for, more than he could admit, was about to lose everything that mattered to her. And he was standing by, letting it happen. The lamplight cast a warm, golden glow on the pages of an old-worn Bible. It had been her mother's. Eliza gently turned to a page marked with a pressed wildflower, a delicate purple lupine from a visit home to Massachusetts 20 years ago. "For everything there is a season," her mother had told her then, pressing the flower between the pages of Ecclesiastes. "Perhaps your season of solitude is preparing you for something beautiful." Cole sat across from her at the small table where they shared their evening meals, watching as she traced the faded petals. The simple intimacy of the moment, the shared silence, the flickering light, the feeling of two lonely souls finding a quiet harbor in each other, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had dined in the grandest restaurants in the country, but he had never felt a contentment as profound as this, sitting in a humble schoolhouse with this remarkable woman. My mother gave me this when I left Boston, Eliza said softly. She was terrified I was throwing my life away. What about marriage, Eliza? She'd ask. What about children of your own? She looked up at him, her gray eyes luminous in the lamplight. I told her perhaps I was called to a different kind of motherhood. I've never truly regretted it, but I wonder if she would be proud of the woman I've become. Any mother would be proud beyond words, Cole said, his voice thick with a sincerity that surprised him. You're kind to say so. She closed the Bible. Tell me about your family, Mr. Cole. Surely there are people somewhere who worry about you. The question landed like a stone, cracking the calm surface of the evening. His parents were long dead, his only brother killed in the war. He had business associates, employees, political allies, an army of people who depended on him, but not one person who knew him as just Cole, not one person who worried. I'm rather alone in the world, he admitted, the raw truth of it catching in his throat. My parents died when I was young. I never found the right person to build a family with. Never found the right person, Eliza said, her gaze gentle but piercingly perceptive, or never took the time to look. In my experience, men who wander as much as you do are often running from something. He felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. She saw right through him. He had been running from the suffocating isolation of his own wealth, from the constant suspicion that people only valued what he could give them, not who he was. Perhaps you're right, he conceded. And what are you searching for? The question hung in the air, charged with a meaning that went far beyond casual curiosity. He looked at her face, at the intelligence and compassion etched into her features, and the answer was so clear, so painfully obvious. He was searching for exactly what he had found in this room. He was searching for her. I suppose I'm searching for a place where I matter, he said finally, not for what I own, but for who I am. Eliza nodded slowly, a sad understanding in her eyes. It's a lonely thing, isn't it? To be valued only for what you can give. Her words were a perfect echo of his own heart. How could she, a woman with so little, understand the unique poverty of a man who had everything? You speak as if you know that loneliness, he said. Don't I? Her smile was wry and melancholic. I've spent 30 years being valued for my usefulness. This town respects me. They depend on me, but respect isn't friendship. Dependence isn't love. I matter to them as their teacher, but I sometimes wonder if I matter to anyone as simply Eliza. The parallel was stunning. They were two sides of the same lonely coin. She, isolated by her indispensable role in the community. He, isolated by his immense wealth and power. Both needed, but neither truly known. Perhaps, he said, his voice barely a whisper, we matter to each other. The words shifted the air between them. He saw it in her eyes. A flicker of recognition, a dawning awareness of the powerful current that had been pulling them together from the moment they met. Mr. Cole, she began, then hesitated, a flush of uncertainty on her cheeks. I find myself hoping you'll choose to stay in Walnut Creek. I would miss our conversations. His heart hammered against his ribs. Her simple, honest admission was worth more to him than any business deal he had ever closed. I would miss them too, he said, the words full of a meaning he could no longer hide. More than I can properly express. They fell into a comfortable silence, the quiet hum of the schoolhouse a cocoon around them. The urge to tell her everything, his name, his wealth, his growing love for her, was a physical pressure in his chest. But he held it back. Tomorrow the inspectors would come. Tomorrow her world could end. And he still hadn't decided what he was willing to risk to save it. What he did know, with a certainty that shook him to his core, was that the woman sitting across from him had become more important than his entire empire. Whatever the cost, he would not let her fall. The time for lies was coming to an end. Deep in the back of the hotel's dusty, neglected library, tucked beneath a stack of old territorial newspapers, Cole found it. It was a yellowed, brittle document, but the official seals were still intact. The original 1847 charter for the township of Walnut Creek. As his eyes scanned the archaic, looping script, his pulse began to quicken. The charter designated Walnut Creek as a special educational settlement. It contained explicit, ironclad protections for its school, and, most importantly, it required that any territorial action affecting education in the town had to be approved by a majority vote of resident property owners. He read it 3 times. It was a bombshell. If this charter was still legally valid, the territorial government had no right to close the school. They had been acting illegally. He was still staring at the document when Mrs. Patterson, the hotel owner, approached with a pot of coffee. "Mr. Cole," she said, her expression a mixture of curiosity and worry. "You seem to have taken a powerful interest in our town's troubles for a man just passing through." He looked up, realizing he'd let his guard down. "I've grown fond of this place," he said carefully. "It seems wrong that outsiders should decide its fate." "Miss Hart has been the soul of this town for 30 years, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice thick with emotion. "Taught my Timothy to read. Seems a crime to lose her over a bit of money." Cole made a decision. It was a risk, but a necessary one. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, lowering his voice, "what would you say if I told you there might be a legal way to fight this?" Her eyes widened. "Legal? What do you mean?" He showed her the charter, explaining its provisions in simple, direct terms. He watched her expression shift from disbelief to hope, and finally to a steely, frontier resolve. "You mean they can't just shut us down?" she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "We have rights. If this charter is valid, yes, but it would mean taking on some very powerful people." Mrs. Patterson's jaw set. "Mr. Cole, if there's a way to save our school, this town will fight. You can count on it." Word spread through Walnut Creek like a prairie fire. By nightfall, the schoolhouse was packed with nearly every adult in town. Cole found himself at the front of the room, explaining the charter's implications, the center of attention in a way that made his skin crawl. He was used to commanding rooms, but as Cole Walker, not as this anonymous stranger. He fielded questions on legal precedent and constitutional law, his answers betraying a depth of knowledge that far exceeded that of a simple traveler. Eliza watched him from the side of the room, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, awe, and a dawning suspicion. When Dr. Henley asked a particularly technical question about the territorial court system, Cole's detailed response caused a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. "Mr. Cole," Tom Brennan finally said, voicing the question on everyone's mind, "you seem to know an awful lot about territorial law for a cowhand." The question hung in the charged air. Cole felt 24 pairs of eyes on him, probing, questioning. Eliza's gaze was the most intense of all. He could almost see the wheels turning in her sharp mind as she pieced together the contradictions. "A man picks up things in his travels," he said, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. The meeting ended with a new sense of hope and a plan of action. A committee was formed to draft a legal response to the territory, and to his dismay, Cole was unanimously appointed to lead it. As the crowd began to file out, Eliza approached him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice soft. "You've given us a fighting chance when I thought all was lost." "I'm glad I could help," he said, bracing himself for what he knew was coming next. "May I ask you something?" Her voice was quiet but direct. "Where did you study law? Your knowledge is remarkable." The walls were closing in. Every answer required a new lie, and each lie felt like another brick in the wall he was building between them. "I've had a wide range of experiences," he said evasively. "Not all of them involved horses." She studied his face, her intelligent eyes searching for the truth. "Mr. Cole, I'm getting the distinct feeling that you are not who you appear to be." The statement was not an accusation, but a simple fact. He felt a surge of panic. How much had she figured out? "None of us are ever quite who we appear to be, Miss Hart." "Perhaps," she countered, "but most of us don't possess the kind of legal expertise that can save a town." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I am more grateful than I can say, but I'm also worried. The men you're challenging, they don't play fair. They destroy people who get in their way. You've made yourself a target tonight." The irony was crushing. She was worried about protecting him from the very forces he commanded. Her genuine concern made his deception feel like a profound betrayal. "Some things are worth the risk," he said softly. "Are they?" You barely know us. Why would you put yourself in danger for a town you just stumbled upon? Because it's not just a town anymore, he thought. Because of you. Perhaps, he said aloud, the words carrying a weight he couldn't conceal. Because I found something here worth fighting for. He saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions. But the moment was broken by the lingering townsfolk. Tomorrow the inspectors would arrive. Tomorrow the battle would be joined. As Cole walked back to his hotel, he knew his time as a simple traveler was over. The fight ahead would require resources and influence he couldn't access as a drifter. And Eliza's sharp, questioning eyes would soon demand answers he wasn't sure he was ready to give. The photograph fell from a business ledger he'd been reviewing, fluttering to the floor of his hotel room. It was a ghost from a life he'd almost forgotten. Taken 5 years ago at a cattle barons meeting in Denver, it showed a younger Cole Walker, dressed in a tailored suit, surrounded by the territory's most powerful men. He was smiling, confident, the very picture of a man who commanded empires. And standing right next to him, shaking his hand, was Jeremiah Hutchkins, the man who was coming tomorrow to destroy Eliza's school. A sharp knock on the door made him jump. He shoved the photo back into the ledger just as Timothy Patterson burst in, his face pale. "Mr. Cole, sir, my ma sent me. There's a man downstairs asking questions about you." Cole's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? Asking about strangers in town, especially anyone traveling under a false name. He's well dressed. Said his name was Garrett, a private investigator. Cole knew the name, Marcus Garrett, a corporate bloodhound, a man who dug up secrets for the highest bidder. Someone had found him. The syndicates, the politicians. Someone knew he was here, and they had sent Garrett to expose him. He followed Timothy downstairs, his mind racing. He spotted Garrett instantly, a thin, hawk-faced man in an expensive coat, studying the guest register. Their eyes met across the lobby. A slow, cruel smile spread across Garrett's face. "Well, well, Cole Walker, as I live and breathe. Though I understand you've been going by just Cole these days." Garrett's voice was loud, carrying across the lobby. Mrs. Patterson gasped. Dr. Henley, who was just leaving, froze in his tracks. Everyone turned to stare. The name Walker clearly meant something. "Mr. Garrett," Cole said, his voice dangerously even, "I wasn't aware you had business in Walnut Creek." "Oh, my business follows interesting situations," Garrett said, his smile widening. "And I hear a very interesting situation is brewing here. A certain powerful cattle baron playing the part of a humble traveler, stirring up trouble for his business rivals." Cole felt the trap spring. Garrett wasn't just here to find him. He was here to detonate him, to destroy his credibility and the town's legal strategy in one public explosion. "I don't know what you mean," Cole said, but the denial was weak. "Don't you?" Garrett pulled out a small notebook. "Because I have it on good authority that the man stirring up this town owns more land in this territory than God himself. A man with enough political influence to solve this little school problem with a single telegram, if he chose to." The words landed like a physical blow. Cole heard Mrs. Patterson's sharp intake of breath. He saw the shock on Dr. Henley's face. But worst of all, he saw Eliza through the schoolhouse window across the street. She had heard Garrett's announcement. The look on her face, a shattering mix of confusion, disbelief, and a betrayal so deep it was a physical wound, broke his heart. "Makes you wonder, doesn't it?" Garrett continued, savoring the moment. "A man with all that power pretending to be helpless while he watches these good people struggle. What are his real motives?" "If you have something to say, Garrett, say it plainly," Cole growled. "Very well." Garrett's voice rose to a theatrical pitch. "Cole Walker, owner of the Walker Ranch Empire, political ally of the very commissioners who are coming to close this school. What are you really doing in Walnut Creek?" The accusation hung in the poisoned air. Through the window, Cole saw Eliza moving, walking quickly towards the hotel. Her face was a mask of cold fury and devastation. The confrontation he had been dreading, the one he had been so desperate to avoid, was here. The hotel door swung open and Eliza strode in. Her gray eyes, usually so full of warmth and patience, were now blazing with a fire that seared him to the soul. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but it cut through the shocked silence of the room like a shard of ice. "Mr. Walker," she said, the name dripping with contempt, "I believe we need to talk." The official registration for the Walker Ranch brand lay on the hotel room table between them. The bold signature, Cole Walker, seemed to mock her from the page. He had offered the proof without hesitation, but the truth was a chasm that had opened up at her feet. "The Walker Ranch," she said, her voice a hollow whisper. 60,000 acres. Government beef contracts. You're not just a cattle baron, Mr. Walker. You're one of them. The very men we've been fighting." "Yes," he said simply. The admission was quiet, but it landed with the force of a landslide. "How long?" she demanded, the whisper replaced by a sharp, brittle anger. "How long have you been sitting in my schoolhouse, eating my food, listening to me pour my heart out about problems you could solve with a snap of your fingers?" The pain in her voice was a knife in his gut. He forced himself to meet her gaze. "From the beginning, I knew I had the resources to help," he said, his own voice raw with regret. "But I didn't know you, Eliza. I didn't know what this town meant. I didn't know what you would come to mean to me." She shot up from her chair, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "So this was what? A game? A little diversion for a bored, wealthy man to see how the other half lives?" "No!" The word was torn from him. "Eliza, please. It wasn't a charade. Do you think I planned any of this? Do you think I wanted to fall in love with a woman whose entire life is a rebuke to everything my world stands for?" The confession hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Eliza froze, her eyes widening. He hadn't just admitted his identity. He had admitted his heart. "Love?" she whispered, the word a fragile question. "Yes, love," he said, the word a torrent of emotion he could no longer contain. "Completely, impossibly in love with a woman who has every reason to hate me. Do you have any idea what it's been like? Watching you suffer over a debt that is less than I spent on a suit of clothes? Knowing that every moment I kept my secret was another betrayal of your trust?" She sank back into her chair, the anger in her eyes giving way to a profound, wounded confusion. "If you felt that way, why not just tell me?" "Because I was a coward," he admitted, the truth a bitter taste. "I was terrified that if you knew who I was, you would see me the way everyone else does, as a bank account, as a political lever, not as a man. I was terrified of losing the one real thing I've ever found." "What did we build, Mr. Walker?" she asked, the formal name a fresh wound. "From where I'm sitting, it looks like it was all built on a foundation of lies." He reached into his coat and pulled out a letter, its creases soft from repeated folding. "Because of this." She took it. It was her own handwriting, one of the dozens of appeal letters she had sent to the Territorial Education Board. "I found this at the Capitol," he said quietly. "It was in a pile of mail marked for disposal. They didn't even bother to read it." She read her own words, the passionate plea for her school, for her children. "I read that letter, Eliza, and I knew I had to meet the woman who wrote it. I had to see if someone with that much heart and fire truly existed." Tears streamed down her face. "So you came to satisfy your curiosity?" "I came to find a person," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I stayed because I discovered that person was everything I had been searching for my entire life." The room was silent, save for her quiet sobs. He longed to go to her, to hold her, but he had forfeited that right. "The irony," she said finally, her voice choked, "is that you are everything we need. The power, the money, the influence. You could save us. I know, but you are also everything I have spent my life fighting against. The concentration of power that sees people as obstacles to profit." "I know that too." She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears, and he saw the impossible chasm between their worlds reflected there. "So what happens now, Mr. Walker? Now that the truth is out?" It was the question he'd been dreading, the moment of reckoning. He met her gaze, his own heart breaking. "Now," he said quietly, "we decide if what we built is strong enough to survive the truth." The sun had not yet risen, but Eliza was kneeling by the school's foundation stone. Her fingers traced the carved letters. "Knowledge is the foundation of freedom. Tears she could no longer hold back fell onto the cold granite. In just a few hours, Jeremiah Hutchkins and his inspectors would arrive. The town was in chaos. Cole's identity had split the community. Some saw a savior, others a viper in their midst. The school board was paralyzed with indecision, and her own heart was a battlefield. The man who had shared her simple meals, the man whose quiet company had healed a loneliness she hadn't known how to name, was a titan of industry, a political puppeteer. He was everything she despised, and yet, the raw honesty in his confession, the desperate love in his eyes, that had felt real. Could something so real be built on such a profound lie? She heard footsteps and turned to see Cole approaching through the pre-dawn mist, carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, his voice gentle. They sat in silence on the schoolhouse steps, the town slowly waking around them. "They'll be here soon," she said finally. "Yes," Cole replied, his voice grim. "They're expecting to roll over a poor, isolated schoolteacher. They are not expecting to find me." "And what will you do? Throw your money at them until they bend to your will?" The bitterness in her voice made him flinch. "No," he said, meeting her gaze. "I will present our legal case based on the charter. I will use the tools of the law to demand a fair hearing. Using the influence your money buys you. Using whatever tools are available to protect something that matters." He corrected her softly. He turned to face her, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Eliza, my reasons for coming here were business. My reasons for staying are you. I'm prepared to publicly oppose my own allies. I'm prepared to risk business relationships that have taken me years to build. I will tear down a part of my own empire to protect this school." The scale of what he was offering was staggering. A public fight between Cole Walker and the cattle syndicates would be a political earthquake. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk so much for us?" "Because this isn't about one school anymore," he said, his voice ringing with a passion she had never heard from him. "It's about what kind of future we're building on this frontier. I've already sent telegrams to allies in the legislature. I've contacted newspaper editors in Cheyenne and Denver. Hutchkins thinks he's coming for a schoolhouse. He's walking into a political firestorm." The sound of approaching horses broke the morning stillness. A group of riders appeared at the end of Main Street. Hutchkins, flanked by his commissioners and a grim-faced sheriff's deputy. "They brought muscle," Cole observed. "They're not planning to negotiate." "Maybe we can't win," she said, her hope faltering. He knelt beside her, his voice an intense whisper. "Eliza Hart, I have watched you create miracles in this room with nothing but chalk and determination. If you can do that, what do you think we can accomplish together?" The word hung between them. Together. For the first time, she let herself imagine it. His power and her purpose, united. A force that could change everything. "Together?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "If you can forgive me," he said, his eyes pleading. "If you can trust that what I feel for you is the truest thing in my life." Before she could answer, Hutchkins and his entourage were upon them. "Miss Hart," the commissioner said, his tone oozing false politeness, "we are here to conduct the inspection." Eliza stood, her spine straightening. "Commissioner Hutchkins," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Before you begin, you should know that the community has retained legal counsel." Hutchkins scoffed. "Legal counsel? I hardly think a small-town lawyer—" "Actually," Cole said, stepping forward, a cold, predatory smile on his face, "I believe you'll find our representation more than adequate." Recognition dawned on Hutchkins' face, followed by a flash of pure, unadulterated fear. "Walker," he stammered, "I should have known." "Commissioner," Cole said, his voice dripping with icy cordiality, "how lovely to see you again. Shall we begin?" Cole unrolled the deed to the Walker Ranch across Eliza's small desk. It was a map of an empire, and its sheer scale sucked the air out of the room. "Gentlemen," Cole began, his voice calm but radiating an authority that dwarfed the commissioner's official power. "Before this inspection proceeds, let's clarify who has legal standing here." Hutchkins stared at the deed, his face turning a blotchy red. "Your land holdings are impressive, Walker, but this is a matter of territorial policy." Oh, but it's also a matter of my property rights, Commissioner, Cole said, producing another document. According to the Territorial Education Act of 1878, a piece of legislation I believe you yourself championed, any landowner with more than 10,000 acres in an educational district has the right to formal consultation before policy changes. As this survey shows, my ranch includes 14,637 acres within the Walnut Creek District, which means by the very law you wrote, you are required to consult with me. The silence was absolute. Hutchkins was caught in his own trap. He had designed the law to give his cattle baron allies more power, never imagining it could be used against him. Very well, Hutchkins snarled. You have 5 minutes for your consultation. I'll need more than 5 minutes, Cole said smoothly, opening a thick folder. You see, I've found some discrepancies in your paperwork. For instance, the debt. You claim it's $347. My review of the invoices shows the actual debt is $218. The rest is a collection of illegal administrative fees you retroactively applied. You had no authority to review those records, Hutchkins sputtered. Actually, I did, Cole countered, his smile like a razor. Section 12 of your act. You really should reread your own legislation, Commissioner. Cole continued, his voice relentless, as he laid out his case. He presented the town charter, along with proof that the territory had reaffirmed its validity just 8 years prior. He systematically, brutally dismantled every legal pretext for the closure. He was a master surgeon, cutting away the lies until only the ugly truth remained. Then came the final, killing blow. But the most interesting discovery, Cole said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, was this. He held up a letter. Even from across the room, Eliza could see the letterhead of the rival cattle syndicate. It's correspondence between your office and a private investment group. It seems they were discussing the very attractive price at which they could acquire this school property once you had foreclosed on it. It appears this isn't about fiscal responsibility at all. It's about a backroom real estate deal. The accusation was a gunshot in the quiet room. Hutchkins went pale. He looked trapped, his political career flashing before his eyes. You're making baseless allegations, Walker. Oh, the evidence is quite extensive, Commissioner, Cole said, tapping the folder. The question is, do we resolve this here and now, or do I present this folder to the territorial legislature, the federal authorities, and every newspaper between here and Washington, D.C.? It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender demand. Hutchkins looked at Cole's cold, unyielding face, then at Eliza's quiet, unbreakable dignity, and he knew he was beaten. He had come to destroy a school, but he had run into an empire. While Cole was cornering Hutchkins, Eliza had been writing. Now, as the defeated commissioner and his men retreated to their horses, she held the letter that would decide her own future. Cole, she said, the name feeling both strange and perfectly natural on her tongue. He looked up, his face flushed with victory, but his eyes were full of a nervous uncertainty as he looked at her. What you did today, she began, her voice steady, it showed me the man you are. Not just the cattle baron, but the fighter, the defender. His face softened with relief, but she held up a hand. But it also showed me how vast the distance is between our worlds. Eliza, if this is about the lie, it's not just the lie, she interrupted gently. It's about what comes next. What happens when you go back to your world of boardrooms and politics, and I stay here in my classroom? What if I don't go back? He asked, his voice low. What if my world is here now, with you? It was the question she had longed to hear, and the one she had to refuse. And what if I told you that I love you too much to let you make that sacrifice? She said, the words an arrow of love and sorrow. His face fell as her meaning sank in. You love me? He whispered. Completely, she said, her voice breaking. I love the man who sat at my table. I love the man who fought for my school. And because I love you, I have to let you go. She placed the letter on the desk. This is my resignation, effective at the end of the school year. No, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Eliza, you can't. This school is you. This school needs to be more than just me, she countered. You've given this town the tools to fight for itself. It can't remain dependent on one woman's dedication or one man's power. And you need to go back and use your power to protect every other Walnut Creek in this territory. And what about us? He pleaded, his voice cracking. We will have the memory of something beautiful, she said, tears now streaming down her face. We will have the knowledge that we found each other and that our love made us both better. He was silent for a long moment, the weight of their impossible choice settling over the room. Then he looked at her, a new light dawning in his eyes. What if there's another way, Eliza? What if we don't have to choose between love and duty? She looked at him confused. What if Cole Walker, the cattle baron, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, decides to become Cole Walker, the territory's foremost advocate for frontier education? What if, instead of sacrificing our worlds, we combine them? The idea hung in the air, a breathtaking, impossible possibility. A new world, not of his or hers, but one they could build together. 6 months later, the clear bronze tone of a new school bell rang out across Walnut Creek. It was a gift, cast in Denver to Eliza's design, paid for by Cole's resources, a perfect symbol of their new life together. Eliza Walker stood in the doorway of the newly expanded schoolhouse, watching the children of the town she had saved, the town they were now transforming. 2 new classrooms had been added, along with a library that was already famous throughout the territory. But the real change was in the children. 3 of her older students were heading to the Territorial Teachers College in the fall on full scholarships from the newly established Walker Educational Foundation. The foundation was their shared dream, a quiet force that was already funding new schools and supporting teachers in the most remote corners of Wyoming. Cole's political influence, once a tool for corporate conquest, was now being used to champion educational reform at the highest levels. His business acumen was now focused on creating sustainable funding models for rural communities. He hadn't abandoned his world. He had repurposed it. Later that day, after a visit from a delegation of impressed territorial officials, Cole and Eliza stood alone in the schoolhouse where it had all begun. The evening light slanted through the windows just as it had on that first night when a lonely teacher had offered a bowl of stew to a mysterious stranger. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "Being just Cole, the simple traveler." "Never," he said, pulling her into his arms. That man was lost. He was searching for something he couldn't even name. He kissed her, a deep, contented kiss that spoke of shared purpose in a hard-won peace. "This man," he whispered against her lips, "has found everything." Hand in hand, they walked out into the gathering dusk. Their love story had become a legend, a testament to the idea that true power isn't about what you own, but what you build, and that the greatest transformations happen when 2 people inspire each other to become the very best versions of themselves. The light in the schoolhouse windows glowed warmly behind them, a beacon of hope in the vast prairie, a promise that knowledge and love could truly change the world. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of second chances, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the incredible story we have for you tomorrow.